Thanks for checking out this movie review video. So this is for the 1972 giallo-inspired film Seven Murders for Scotland Yard. And this is one that's come up when I've named off one of the writers before for other credits, and I've said I've been getting to, and I did. Now, if you're wondering, this is available on the Giallo Realm YouTube channel, which is where I get a lot of my giallo and giallo-esque films or giallo-inspired films to watch for these reviews. Lots of them on there. Highly recommend checking that out because obviously it's free. Anyway, this one directed by Jose Luis Madrid, who also directed The Horrible Sexy Vampire, interesting title, and The Crimes of Petiot. Have not seen either. Written by Madrid as well as Tito Carpi. Now, Tito Carpi's also written scripts for Cold Eyes of Fear, The Devil with Seven Faces, which I did review that one, Jungle Holocaust, Tentacles, The Shark Hunter, and Alien from the Deep. He has 105 writing credits on IMDb, just so you know. And Sandro Continenza, who also wrote scripts for Appointment for Murder, which sounds like a good title, Uncle Was a Vampire, Where Are You Going All Naked? Guess what that is. The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, which I have reviewed, and that's on my channel. The Crimes of the Black Cat, I've also reviewed that. It's on my channel. The Legend of Blood Castle, School of Death, and The Double, which I've also watched and reviewed The Double on my channel. Bruno, also in this, if you're watching the version on Giallo Realm, the character of Bruno is called Pedro in the English dubs. So I'm going to refer to that character as Pedro. Now, Bruno / Pedro is played by Paul Nashee. I think that's how you say it. You know, of the fame of, doing a lot of werewolf and horror stuff in general. But it's interesting to note that Paul had done this movie the same year as Fury of the Wolfman and Dr. Jekyll versus the Wolfman. So these three films all came out in the same year. So he was pretty busy. Now, if people can't tell, obviously the film is based on Jack the Ripper. If you've seen it, it's very Jack the Ripper. They even are making parallels between this killer and Jack the Ripper. And then they just even start calling the killer Jack the Ripper, which is weird because initially they literally say it's like Jack the Ripper, but he's different. So like they want to draw that distinction, but then they just start calling him Jack the Ripper. And then the letter that comes from the killer himself that Campbell is convinced is a legitimate one, even though he's gotten so many fake ones, Inspector Campbell, that is. That letter calls out, I'm different than Jack the Ripper, like literally says that. So it's a little weird. Nice solid killer vibes early on in the film with the walking POV shot kind of showing the dirty, grimy streets of London, because that's where this is taking place. If you couldn't tell from the close-up shot on Big Ben that then goes to the street, and then we're seeing the killer POV walking around, looking at all the advertisements for, sex clubs and pornography and all that type of stuff, giving you the idea that something that comes up in Giallo and Giallo-inspired films all the time, this is a sex maniac. Yes. Now, in the end, we find out it's not so much a sex maniac in the way you're thinking. It's more of like a so angry that they can't have sex maniac, because Winston ends up talking about being impotent, but we will get to that later in this review. Kind of a terrible scene just watching the woman undress with no music. It's a theme with this film. There are a lot of scenes that just go on way too long. They're focused on something that's just not interesting. And then on top of that, they have no music playing. So it's like, it's boring enough if you had music. It's double boring if you don't have music. So there are quite a few of those, a few of them involving a woman just getting undressed. And she doesn't even get fully undressed. So I don't even think there's any nudity in this, which is crazy because these types of films usually have a decent amount of nudity. It's more of like implied sexual nature and talking about it and kind of, implying it, getting at it, but not actually showing it. A pretty lurid start to the film for this time period, but man, that kill doesn't look so great. The very first kill, and actually all the kills for the most part, they don't look that great. It's just like a close-up of a knife. But it's not just that, like, the actual practical effects don't look that great. It's how they cut it together. It's a lot of kind of quick shots, and it seems really, really choppy. And there are actually a lot of moments in the film, especially like action-related or kill-related, that just are very, very chopped up and choppy and like hard to watch for that reason. Just kind of like disorienting and just like, wait, what is going on? Just not smoothly executed, unfortunately. I assume that the little girl watching the killer walk down the stairs for what seems like forever will end up being a prime witness. Initially, I thought that she was going to end up being the key to solving everything, but that doesn't happen because it turns out that Winston was kind of at this apartment complex planting false evidence to make it look like Campbell was the one doing the killing because he was pissed because his wife Sandra was interested in Campbell. Now, the reason for that, probably because Winston couldn't get it up. He even said so himself. So it's a weird twist in the film for sure. The whole like love triangle situation seemed really forced and thrown in there. It seems like they had this idea to take it that direction in the end, and they couldn't figure out a good way to integrate it that makes it feel like it belongs, in my opinion. Kind of a weird flashback of how Pedro hurt his leg, especially with the light blue lighting. Really weird. Obviously, he was like a circus performer, a trapeze artist of sorts, and falls and hurts his leg. Now, here's the thing. This does nothing for his character. I don't understand why they have this backstory for him where he gets hurt, and then the entire time he's hobbling around, there's no purpose. Like, I don't know. I guess maybe it's just to give him a very specific way he walks, so you know it's him when he's walking places, but it seemed like it had no importance to the actual story. But then again, maybe part of that has to do with the dubbing, and maybe in its original language, it's a little bit different. I don't know. There wasn't much of a build-up for the second murder. It kind of just popped out of nowhere and was over very quickly. Yeah, some of these murders are just like that. It's just kind of like they're ticking them off. 7 murders for Scotland Yard. So at times it's just like, oh, hold on a second. We got to write in that another one happens because we have to hit 7 by the time we hit the end of this film. So they just kind of like, real quick, oh, there, that one's done. So, but it makes no sense because like those are the moments that are more interesting, right? So instead of taking more time on those interesting, crazy moments, you're taking more time on the moments where you have no music and you're showing a woman boringly undress. A lot of questions about the execution here. Pedro's first fight scene in the bar was very chopped up, just like those action-y and killer scenes I was talking about before, how bad they end up looking because of how choppy they are. Inspector Campbell makes a lot of statements that make me suspect him as the Ripper, which I think that was intentional writing-wise, because we are supposed to kind of go along the line of thinking that Winston was supposed to be creating with all this kind of false evidence he was throwing out there. But for the audience, Campbell is supposed to kind of incriminate himself. So some examples was, he was talking about his kind of intuition about thinking that this one particular letter was authentic when he had read so many fake letters from the killer. That just seems kind of suspicious from the get-go for the audience. And then also that when he makes the comment about how the killer must have been a trusted person. And you're thinking, well, you're an inspector, you are inspecting the crime, so you are obviously a prime trusted person. But then obviously, as we know, Winston was a teacher who was also a very trusted person. So why did Ramsey kill Rosemary? Angry about her having something going with Winston, the teacher? I don't understand. Now, I'm making an assumption there because it seems like Ramsey, who was the boyfriend of Rosemary, killed her, and her body was draped over the uneven bars in the gymnasium. I don't understand that. That was very odd. But I assume he did it because he was literally standing there with the bloody knife. Now, I don't know for sure because they don't revisit that. They don't talk about it later and say that he definitely did it or he definitely didn't do it, because it could have been the case that Winston did it, because Rosemary had just visited Winston and he did ask some suspicious questions like, nobody knows you're here. He asked like multiple times, nobody knows you're here, right? So he could have killed her and then Ramsey finds her dead and stupidly picks up the murder weapon. I mean, that type of stuff happens in these films, but it's weird. Gotta love how Belinda tells Pedro he'll go get over his dead wife quicker than he thinks. Yeah, the friend Belinda who's consoling to some degree Pedro in the bar, and is just like, "Oh, you'll get over your dead wife." Like literally, it just happens. I don't know if it's like the day prior, but within that week, like it had literally just happened, at least within a few days, and she's just like, "Oh, you'll get over it." It's ridiculous. And then they get drunk together. With Pedro waking up in bed with a dead Belinda just 35 minutes into the film, you know he's not the killer because it's happening way too early. But how did he end up in that situation without knowing what went down? That makes absolutely no sense. Giant plot hole. You're, I guess, supposed to assume he got so blackout drunk, as did Belinda, and then Winston comes along, kills her, puts them both in bed, or they got into bed, passed out, and then he shows up and kills her, and somehow Pedro sleeps through her murder. It doesn't make sense. Another one of these things like this, but, you know, giallo and giallo-esque films do this stuff all the time. Campbell professing his love for Sandra seems pretty out of the blue. Obviously, it ends up playing a part in the film much later story-wise, but it seems very out of the blue, and you're just kind of like, why are we adding this love triangle? Is this actually important? And it doesn't seem like it's naturally put in there. Sandra walking alone in the dark naturally ends with her getting stabbed, as I'm sure everyone watching the film assumed would happen. It's just one of those things when the woman's like, "Oh no, I'll walk by myself in the dark, in dark clothing, in this park," when there's a murderer out roaming around, and yes, she gets killed. Another crappy kill scene. You know, shoes will solve the case when the girl tells Lulu she's seen Pedro's shoes before, most likely during that drawn-out scene of the killer walking down the stairs, which I referenced earlier. But actually, in the end, that's what I was thinking at the time, in the end, the shoes don't solve anything, because it was all a setup for Campbell to be suspected, which, by the way, Pedro obviously ends up suspecting him, which is why he ends up following him to Winston's kind of like summer villa or whatever that is, and then ends up saving Campbell, actually. I like how the guys who confront Pedro with the knives wait one by one to get their asses kicked by him and be killed. That's another thing. Like, it's just ridiculous. And that happens in all the fight scenes for the most part. You can see actors waiting to get hit. You can see actors waiting to get stabbed. Whatever the situation is. Like, these characters are literally just one by one waiting to be dispatched of. And it's just ridiculous. But what we do learn with these fight scenes with Pedro is that he's a badass. That's what we're supposed to know about it. So it sets it up so that when he has to fight Winston later, you know he's got a good chance of winning it. And actually, you assume he will win it because at this point, I mean, he's battle-tested, right? Totally. Surprising that Lulu reveals Campbell is the killer with 30 minutes left in the film, because they usually save that till the end. Well, there's a reason for that, because it was Winston, in fact. And they actually did have me fooled for a little bit. I actually did think for a minute that it would be Campbell, but then when they revealed that, I was like, there's 30 minutes left in the film. Are they going to just put in a bunch of filler? Which I wouldn't have put it past them, obviously. But no, they don't. They took it a little further. So I'm glad there was that extra twist at the end, which that's usually how these films go, but not always. So that's why I wasn't fully expecting that. The scene of Lulu taking her letter to the police is kind of weird. Campbell posing as Chambers, also weird, especially because I know it's supposed to make him look suspicious, but why would he do that if he's not the killer? You know what I mean? It's just weird. And then him going into another room to actually read the letter is another weird aspect to it, especially when you know at the end that he's not the killer. And then the aspect of literally Lulu could have just told him what was in the letter. I mean, I know she didn't write the letter, I know it was Pedro's, but she knew the information and she could have just said it to him. It's such a weird scene, but there are plenty of those in this. The scene of Pedro following Campbell just seems like it's a sightseeing tour of London. It really does, which I don't mind it for that reason. One of the things I love about these giallo and giallo-esque films is there's this cool element of like sightseeing that's always added in there. You usually get a good look at the cityscape, at the architecture, and I do like seeing that because I haven't been out of the United States. I've been to Canada when I was really young, but other than that, haven't been out of the United States. Lulu's friend literally just watched her die and then backed himself up against a wall, waiting to die. This is another one of those things where I was talking about, like the fight with Pedro, where the guys were waiting to be dispatched. This guy's the same. Like, he watches Lulu get stabbed. She falls to the ground, and he looks concerned, but he also doesn't like rush to her aid or anything. Then he stands up, backs up against the wall, and literally stands there and waits to be stabbed. Logic out the window. We don't need it. Not in giallo and giallo-like films. The castle that Campbell walks around in is kind of cool. But do we need this super long exploration scene? I would say not really, but then again, like the sightseeing of London portion, I kind of enjoyed seeing the creepy aspects of this castle. But it's just another one of those scenes. It's so long and drawn out. When Winston's revealed as the actual killer, the impotence talk ends up making a lot more sense. A knife is the only hard thing that he can penetrate a woman with. Get it? You like that one? That's a good one. Yeah, it literally sets up this explanation that he's so frustrated, like sexually, that the knife is basically a surrogate for his penis, in essence, and he's penetrating the women that way. There actually is a big academic community theory in like slasher films that's kind of what the representation of stabbing really is. It's phallic. It's like a holding something that is a symbol of the penis, and they're penetrating, so it is a sexual in nature, and that is very much seen in this film. Once Pedro and Winston start tussling, you know that Pedro is going to end up winning it because he's been in a few fights previously and handily won all of those. I mean, Winston must have been a good fighter, let's be honest, because Pedro took care of those 3 dudes with knives pretty easily. So the fact that he struggled as much as he did against Winston lets you know that Winston also kind of a badass. But in the end, as an audience member, because of the fights that we've seen before with Pedro, you know in the end, Winston's no real match for Pedro. Because, this is a quote, "Because I don't want to be Jack the Ripper's last victim." That's an interesting way to end the film. That's when Campbell's sitting in the car. He's already been stabbed and, he's bleeding out, and he's kind of like, "Oh, could you get me to the nearest hospital maybe?" And then he says, "Because I don't want to be Jack the Ripper's last victim." And then that's where they end it. Then it's like credits roll. Kind of weird way to end it, kind of, because it's on this like kind of comedic note in a sense. Like he's trying to make a joke in a way, and you're just like, okay. I mean, it doesn't land. Maybe it did back then, different decades for sure. And the last thing I really have to say about this is lots of scenes that are just excessively long and most of the time with no music, which does not at all help. I already talked about that, but it bears reiterating that those were awful choices in my opinion. I hate that. So overall, as you can tell, I wasn't a huge fan of this film. There was enough for me to not regret watching it. I will say that much. But out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'm giving it 2 stars, just 2 stars. So it's obviously not very high up there on my giallo and giallo-inspired list of films, which I actually am keeping on my phone. And I think at one point I'm going to do a video kind of giving maybe my top 10, top 20, something like that. And maybe even my bottom. Yeah, that might be good as well. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on this film. Go ahead and put it in the comments, especially if it's different. And tell me, what did you like? What didn't you like? Let's get into a nerdy discussion. Or if you just want to talk giallo in general or horror in general, we can also do that. That is fine. Do me a quick favor. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, awesome. I thank you very much. If you haven't, that's your best way to pay me back if you like this video or any video I've ever done. It is quick. It is painless. It costs you $0. And know that it keeps me motivated to keep doing these videos. Just telling you. I mean, it's true. Anyway, regardless, I really do thank you taking your time to watch this. And until next time, keep it brutal.